Hello my beautifuls, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. It's so lovely to have you. My name's Lou Crawford and today I'm going to be talking to you about the infamous Alcatraz prison break. So if that's something that floats your boat, that you're interested in, definitely stay tuned and let's get into it. Alcatraz Island was formerly a military base and it was opened as a federal maximum security prison in 1934. This notorious prison was nicknamed the Rock because it was built on a 22-kilometre island about 1.25 miles from the city of San Francisco. Due to the fact that the temperature of the water ranged between 8 to 12 degrees Celsius all year round and the crazy strong currents that rolled out to sea, the prison was reputedly inescapable. Only the worst of the worst were sent here, lifers like Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. June the 11th, 1962, the three men vanished, and that started the biggest manhunt of all time, and it's one that's continued until this day. So I'm going to talk about the escape crew now. The first couple were John and Clarence Anglin, and they were both in their 30s. They were born into a family of 14 children in Georgia, and that was a very poor family, and they ended up in the correctional facilities after a series of armed robberies. The brothers generally attempted their heists at night time when the banks and places were closed because they didn't want to have any casualties. So they did actually have one weapon once, and it turned out to be a toy gun. Morris. Frank was orphaned at 11 and he was bounced around from foster care home to foster care home, and at 13 he committed his first crime. Eventually he went to Louisiana State Penitentiary where he escaped, and he escaped for a year before he was actually caught, and then he was transferred to Alcatraz. Alan West. So it was reported that Alan West had the education of an 8th grader, and prior to going to Alcatraz, he'd been in and out of prison 20 times for various different crimes. He did try to escape, and that was unsuccessful, and so he was transferred to Alcatraz. So now that we know who the escape crew is, let's actually get into the escape. So Morris and the Anglins devised a really intricate plan 6 months before escaping, and this included stealing prison-issue raincoats that they used to make life vests and a raft out of. They also used soap and paper to make these paper mache heads, and these paper mache heads had hair, which we presume Clarence had gotten from his work as a barber. So this was actually human hair that he was using. And these heads, these dummy heads, they had lips and they had eyebrows, and they were actually real enough looking so they could be used to fool officers to make it look as though the prisoners were still in their bed asleep. They also stole tools and spoons so they could actually chip away at a hole at the back of their cells. And this hole was going to be big enough for them to crawl through to a utility area that was pretty much unguarded and unmanned. And from there, they used that, there were some pipes there that they could climb up to a hidden area, and they used that hidden area that was directly above their cells. They used that hidden area to craft and make the tools and the things that they needed for their escape. The FBI actually said that they used homemade drills, and they made these drills out of bits from broken down hoovers. And these drill bits were used to widen the holes that they were going to escape through, because if you can imagine, that would be pretty tough going to try and chip out concrete with a metal spoon, no matter how sharp it would have been. You may be thinking, how did they actually disguise the sound of the drills, because that would echo through all of the cells. But they had this thing called a happy hour, where an hour a day, if you had a musical instrument or you played a musical instrument, you were able to play that in your cells. So they hid this clandestine clandestine actions by playing music above the noise. On June the 11th, 1962, they crawled through the hole that they'd made in their cell. They climbed up a network of pipes up into the prison roof, slid down a smokestack, and there they escaped into the water on their life raft that they'd made out of these 50 raincoats. When they got down to the water's edge, they used bellows, improvised, which were concertinas, and they improvised and used them as bellows to inflate that life raft and get themselves into the water. plan that they had was to sail across to Angel Island, which is about 2 miles from Alcatraz Island, and from there they would sail across Raccoon Island, which is about half a mile away from the bay or the city of San Francisco. Their plan after that was to steal a car and some clothing and make their getaway. So you might be wondering how these details are known, and I think it's important to note here at this point that Frank Morris couldn't actually break through the last bit of his cell wall, and therefore he couldn't crawl through the hole, and he was left behind. And he chose to give all of the details of the plan to the FBI. Bill Long was the lieutenant that was in charge of the cell block that night, and he says that he never heard a peep from any of the prisoners or anything. He says that it was a totally normal night for him and there was nothing out of the ordinary at all. Now his shift was from midnight, so they escaped about 10:30. But he said that he did have some reports from the lieutenant that was doing the shift before him. The lieutenant reported that he heard a sound like a hubcap rolling on the floor, and another officer said that they thought that they'd heard footsteps above them. Now I think that it's quite possible that the hubcap sound could have been the sound of the air vent popping off the roof, because that when they climbed up to the roof they would have had to click off the air vent to get out into the open. But everything, even though the sounds were heard, it all came to nothing, and then it was time to do their morning count. Long was saying that they went around the gallery to do their count, their usual count, but the officer from B1 didn't actually come back, so Long went off to see where he was. And this is a quote from Long, and I want to read this out because it's quote unquote. So it says, he was hot-footing it down toward me and he says, Bill, I got a guy who won't get up for count. Long remembers. Well, I said, Sarge, I'll get him up. So I went down to the cell, got down on my knee, put my head up against the bar. I reached out my left hand through the bar and hit the pillow and hollered, get up for count. Then he says he almost had a heart attack. Bam, the head flopped off onto the floor, Long said, and I thought right then, that was a head that fell off onto the floor. I know I shouldn't laugh, but it sounds quite comical. Can you imagine it just going pop onto the floor? You'd be like, what? Was I really that strong to knock a man's head off? He said, I jumped back 4 feet from the bars. I mean, the most unexpected thing you could almost imagine. Long then said that he ran to the phone and sounded the alarm. The next thing that they did was to go to the safe, because the safe had an action plan for what happened when there were escaped prisoners. So they put that into motion. They contacted Washington DC, they alerted the newspapers. They were actually saying that it was the biggest manhunt since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, which was huge. Boats were put right into the water immediately, and they were scouring the bay for any signs of the escaped prisoners. Officers searched every single tiny inch of the island. Even locals were brought into it and they were looking for them as well. They searched pretty much everywhere. But Frank Morris, John Anglin and Clarence Anglin were never seen again. So I just want to chat about some theories here about whether or not they actually are, because there are theories that they're still alive and there are theories that they perished in the water, the freezing cold water. So let's have a chat about a couple of different theories that I've uncovered during my research. So let's talk about whether or not they could have actually made it first. One of the key things of Alcatraz was that it was on this island, that the waters around it were freezing, as we discussed earlier, and that the current was super strong. So there were thoughts that if they hadn't drowned from exhaustion or because of the freezing cold water, that they would most likely have been swept out to sea. However, that consensus was challenged in 2014 when a team of Dutch research scientists used interactive models to conduct an experiment with the same conditions of that night on June the 11th, 1962. And the team came to the conclusion that the men could absolutely have escaped if they'd done so within a small window of time between 11 PM and midnight of that night. They said that if they paddled really super hard, that they could have potentially made it across to the mainland. But if they had faltered or they'd taken it too slow, that they most likely would have perished that night. And statistically, the majority of bodies that drown in the bay float to the surface, and this wasn't the case with any of the 3 bodies. They just completely and utterly vanished. This brings me to also the next bit, which is that their family think that they survived as well. The family of the Anglin brothers have always maintained that they had survived and that they've been keeping in sporadic contact with them ever since that they escaped. And in 2015, the nephews of John and Clarence, Ken and David Whitner, went public and said that they believed their uncles were living in Brazil and were still alive. They also said that their mother had been receiving a Christmas card from John and Clarence for 3 years, and this handwriting was analysed and proved to be theirs, but the date of the cards could never be proven. It could never be determined. This is all on top of the fact that there was also a letter sent to the FBI in 2015, and it reads, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. If you announce on TV that I'll be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am. This is no joke." So the US Marshal's Office, who are the sole investigative body that are looking at the case still, sent the letter to the FBI labs, and they were tested for DNA, and the handwriting was also tested, but it came back as inconclusive. Now let's talk about the possibility that they perished. Oh, sorry, noisy chair. Getting comfortable. That they perished on that night of June the 11th, 1962. Bits of wood were found in the water that resembled a paddle, and it was confirmed that it was those of the escapees. On June the 14th, some floating bags that were made out of the raincoats were also found, and they contained the property of, it was irrefutable that it was property of the escapees, because there were photos of John and Clarence Anglin's family. There were 9 pieces of paper, and on those pieces of paper were things like phone numbers for contacts, of who to contact when they got out, and a letter to Clarence Anglin. And many people say that this just shows that the whole journey and the whole attempt of the escape was ill-fated, because they wouldn't easily leave behind those bags, those raincoat bags, because it's such sentimental information, and also the contacts as well. That's a pretty big thing to leave behind. But who knows? It's possible that those bags fell overboard and the current was strong and they just couldn't get to them. On the 15th of June, a homemade life jacket was found near Conkai Island, and on the 22nd of June, another life jacket with its ties still tied was found about 100 yards from Alcatraz, the Alcatraz Island. There's also the fact that all 3 of them had very little money, and because there were no big thefts reported or any hold-ups for either food or clothes or even transport, the idea was that they had actually perished during that night when they tried to escape. In mid-July 1962, a Norwegian freight ship saw a body in the water about 20 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. The thing is that they didn't report this body, sorry, this was about 6 weeks after they'd escaped, and they didn't report this body until they got back to San Francisco, and that was in the autumn, and the body was never ever recovered. So I guess make of that what you will. I'd love to know what your theories and thoughts are of what actually happened, whether they did escape or whether or not they perished on that night. I do know that the US Marshal's Office are still actively pursuing the case because they haven't found a body and it hasn't been closed. They don't know, they could possibly still be alive somewhere. In fact, US Marshal Michael Dyke said from his office in Oakland, California, he said, quote unquote, Leads still come in. I just got one a couple of weeks ago. Here's one that says they were in a small town in Alabama living off the farm. Here's one saying they came to her house when she was a little girl, and she says her father told her as a child that Clarence Anglin used to come to her house regularly. So, this US Marshal, Michael Dyke, has been in charge of the case for the last 7 years. We've been looking over the case for the last 7 years, and it's kind of caught the attention, always caught the attention of the media and of Hollywood. You've got 3 guys that did this incredible escape from a prison that was meant to be inescapable. Back then it filled the airwaves, and basically all this footage of the police scouring the bay looking for these escaped prisoners. Again, the US Marshal Michael Dyke says that they don't give up looking for people, and quote unquote he said, in this case this would be like saying, well yeah, they probably are dead, we're going to quit looking. Well, there's no proof they're dead, so we're not going to quit looking. And no proof is what's flummoxed the local police, the Coast Guard, the Bureau of Prisons, the FBI, for almost coming up, what, 50 years in 2022. I just want to leave you with this one last thing, and that is that the History Channel showed a photo taken 13 years after the escape, and it was allegedly of John and Clarence Anglin, and it was taken in Brazil. So I will pop that picture up for you to have a good look yourself. But for now, no one truly knows whether the Alcatraz escapees pulled off their sneaky plan and achieved their goal of freedom, or whether they indeed perished in the icy cold waters of the San Francisco Bay. And currently, the case remains unsolved. Well, that's it for this edition of my true crime mystery. I hope that you enjoyed that. It was really fun to research into, actually, and just read a bit more into what the idea is behind them escaping, and whether or not, and have the thought of whether or not they're actually alive. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, whether you think they're alive or whether you think they actually didn't make it across to the mainland. But yes, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you. And if you did enjoy this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the absolute world to me. Have an amazing day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. And thank you so much again, and I will speak to you soon. There's a really funny beeping sound, and I have no idea what it is. Is it 1 o'clock yet?